For as long as Hollywood has shaped the modern imagination, science fiction has carried a reputation for innovation, prophecy, and bold experimentation. Yet behind that creative brilliance lies a quieter, far more unsettling truth. Some of the genre's most celebrated films may not have originated from the names printed in their credits. Instead, they may trace back to drafts that arrived without authors' treatments that surfaced, without explanation, or manuscripts that drifted into studio circulation with no identifiable source. These documents formed the backbone of stories that rewired cinema, yet no one can say who wrote them or why they appeared. In the dim corners of studio archives, there are references to screenplays that do not match any registered writer, version numbers that skip abruptly, revisions logged without signatures, pages typed on machines no one can account for. Filmmakers privately admit that the original script they received contained ideas they never saw again in drafts supposedly written before or after. And fans digging through discarded materials and auction documents often discover outlines or scenes that mirror the final films but bear no trace of official authorship. Over time, these anomalies have formed a pattern too consistent to ignore. It suggests that behind the world building, behind the philosophical questions and visionary landscapes, another layer exists, a shadow lineage of writers who shaped sci-fi from behind the curtain. Whether these unknown contributors were early collaborators, ghostwriters who never stepped forward, or individuals intentionally omitted from the record remains impossible to confirm. What we can say is that their fingerprints linger everywhere. Tonight, we examine 15 sci-fi films built upon foundations obscured by time, misfiling, or deliberate silence, works influenced by drafts that should not exist or by voices that quietly vanished after leaving their mark. These films may not only reflect the visions of their credited creators, but whispers from authors the world was never meant to recognize. 1. Edge of Tomorrow, the version that was deleted before records were saved. Although Edge of Tomorrow is officially grounded in the novel, all you need is kill a persistent rumor haunts its development, a pre-production script that vanished before formal documentation began. This rumored version, sometimes called the erased adaptation, allegedly offered a darker interpretation of the source material, leaning heavily into the existential despair and tactical recursion embedded in the original novel. Accounts from early production assistants suggest the draft depicted longer, more brutal loop sequences and a psychologically fractured protagonist struggling to retain identity across repeated cycles. Those who recall encountering the erased adaptation describe a manuscript written with an intensity that bordered on oppressive. It illustrated the battlefield as an evolving labyrinth governed by unseen forces, and it explored the protagonist's gradual erosion of self with unsettling clarity. Many of these themes appear faintly in the final film, yet differ sharply from the tone of known drafts. Production notes from the period reference ideas, non-linear memory collapse, loop-induced hallucinations that align closely with descriptions of the missing script. Efforts to recover the document proved useless. No digital copy survived, no printed version was archived, and version tracking logs show a gap where an early draft should appear. Some insiders speculate the adaptation was commissioned prematurely and later scrapped due to rights concerns. Others believe it may have been intentionally removed after influencing key creative decisions, its tone deemed too bleak for the film the studio wanted. Despite its disappearance, echoes of the erased adaptation resonate throughout Edge of Tomorrow, the relentless pacing, the existential undercurrents, and the lingering sense that the narrative conceals more darkness than it reveals. Its absence underscores the possibility that a foundational layer of the film was shaped by a writer whose work no longer exists in any official form. 2. Moon draft that explained too much. Although Moon is widely admired for its elegant minimalism, early whispers from the development phase suggest that a far more expansive script once existed, a draft that explored the ethics of cloning and corporate secrecy in unsettling depth. This manuscript, referred to vaguely by insiders as the extended internal version, reportedly included detailed logs of prior clone failures, sophisticated psychological analyses, and a more elaborate depiction of the lunar facility's hidden compartments. Yet, the draft is absent from all official archives and is not acknowledged in any credited writing history. Those who claim to have read the extended version describe it as hauntingly precise, blending biomedical realism with chilling emotional detachment. Scenes portrayed spirals of memory degradation, the breakdown of identity across clone cycles, and internal sabotage mechanisms allegedly built into the base. Several of these concepts echo subtly through the final film, even though no recognized draft contains them explicitly. When Duncan Jones was asked about unusual early materials, he admitted reviewing a variety of explorations but declined to specify. Studio logs provide no evidence of additional writers or consultants during the period when the extended version would have circulated. Even more puzzling is the gap in the archival timeline, an unexplained pause in script logging that aligns suspiciously with testimonies about the draft's presence. Some believe the manuscript was an unsolicited submission, refined enough to catch temporary attention. Others suggest it may have originated from a short-term collaborator who was removed before contracts were finalized. But the theory that unsettles fans the most is that the draft disappeared precisely because it exposed too much, offering a level of detail the production chose to avoid. Whatever its origins, the extended internal version remains a ghostly imprint on Moon's mythology, shaping its psychological resonance from a shadow the film never fully acknowledges. 3. Sunshine, the rewrite that no record can confirm. Behind the haunting imagery of Sunshine, there lies an obscure piece of its development history, a rewrite draft that circulated among certain team members yet never appeared in any formal archive. This version, often described by those who encountered it as the latent rewrite, presented a more psychological and metaphysical interpretation of the crew's descent toward the dying sun. Unlike Alex Garland's recognized drafts, this manuscript adopted a tone that bordered on clinical detachment, mixing scientific exposition with surreal emotional fragmentation. Its author was never identified. Individuals who reviewed the latent rewrite recall sequences that emphasized sensory overload, perceptual drift, and the breakdown of individual identity under severe solar exposure. These scenes, though absent from authenticated drafts, seem reflected in the film's final aesthetic choices, especially the disorienting visual transitions and the abstract portrayal of human consciousness unraveling near the Icarus II's destination. Notes scribbled in the margins proposed alterations to pacing and character psychology suggestions that later manifested subtly in production decisions, despite their unverifiable origin. Attempts to trace the rewrite yielded nothing. There was no digital trail, no submission note, and no record of compensation to any writer outside the primary team. Some crew believe the manuscript might have been an experiment by a scientific consultant whose involvement was never formalized. Others whispered that it may have been an early internal attempt to reframe the film as a study of existential collapse rather than a survival narrative. Its disappearance occurred quietly, overshadowed by the pressures of production. Yet remnants of its influence persist in the film's tonal DNA: the unsettling blurring of physical and psychological boundaries, the heightened abstraction of fear, and the near-mystical framing of solar phenomena. Whether intentionally buried or simply lost, the rewrite represents a missing thread, one that suggests sunshine was shaped partly by a voice that left no trace behind. 4. The Prestige, the manuscript from a writer no one recognized. During the adaptation of The Prestige, an unusual script circulated briefly within the production offices, a document containing elaborate expansions of the rivalry, deeper psychological fractures, and alternative interpretations of duplication. What made the manuscript remarkable was not its content, but its absence of attribution. It bore no contract attachment, no record of commission, and no email trail confirming delivery. Yet it was complete, structured, and annotated, as though it had been prepared by someone intimately familiar with the film's thematic intentions. Accounts from staff who reviewed it describe a chillingly analytical tone. The manuscript proposed scenes that emphasized the erosion of identity, the existential consequences of replication, and the moral decay embedded in obsession. Certain passages envisioned a darker portrayal of Tesla's machine, treated not as an invention, but as an intrusion, something bordering on the unnatural. Many of these elements echo faintly in the finished film, though no known draft records their origin. When script coordinators attempted to log the manuscript, they quickly discovered it did not correspond to any authorized writer. A notation in a production binder referred cryptically to the external draft, but no further explanation was given. Shortly afterward, the document was removed from circulation, replaced by rewrites that aligned more closely with the Nolan's recognized style. Former assistants claimed the anonymous manuscript influenced several key tonal choices, even if indirectly. Its emphasis on duplicity, moral cost, and the dissolution of self aligns strikingly with the psychological undercurrents of the final film. Its disappearance adds a fitting layer to a story built on deception and concealed truths. If someone outside the credited team contributed to the film's thematic design, their role remains hidden, an unseen architect who shaped the illusion without ever stepping into the spotlight. 5. Looper, the file with no digital origin. During the development of Looper, an anomaly surfaced within the studio's digital archive, a screenplay file with no origin data. It possessed no upload signature, no writer ID, and no internal routing trail. Yet the document was fully formed, containing time loop mechanics, character arcs, and atmospheric beats that paralleled the film's structure with uncanny precision. Team members initially assumed it was an early draft by Rian Johnson that had become detached from its metadata. But when Johnson reviewed the mysterious document, he denied authorship. Individuals who recall analyzing the file describe a very different writing style, fragmentary, hyper-focused, and emotionally distant. The anonymous draft featured extended sequences dissecting causal recursion and the psychological deterioration that accompanies repetitive timelines. Several set pieces bore striking resemblance to those eventually filmed, though the tonal execution diverged sharply. An especially chilling sequence, later removed entirely from the screenplay process, depicted the long-term collapse of identity under temporal strain, something that never appeared in known drafts, but resonates faintly in the final narrative. Technical teams attempted to recover the file's history, only to find it lacked the expected digital fingerprints. It appeared neither imported nor created on the studio network. Some believed the file resulted from a rare data corruption phenomenon. Others suspected it was manually injected into the system through unconventional access. 6. Interstellar, the pages no one could verify. Before Interstellar evolved into its sweeping meditation on gravity, time, and human resilience, rumors circulated about a peculiar cluster of pages discovered early in development documents that did not correspond to any known draft by Jonathan Nolan, Christopher Nolan, or Kip Thorne. These pages, quietly referenced by a handful of production assistants, allegedly contained early conceptual descriptions of multidimensional structures and emotional patterns tied to gravitational anomalies. Yet their authorship was never established and they appeared in no script database. People who handled the stray pages recall an unexpectedly sophisticated voice clinical, yet poetic merging scientific theory with psychological introspection. The document described a more intricate depiction of the tesseract, including sensory distortions and temporal currents rendered with unsettling precision. Strikingly, certain passages resembled key moments later seen in the film, though no confirmed draft includes them in this form. When archivists attempted to trace the pages, they encountered dead ends. No metadata, no email chain, no time-stamped uploads. The packet seemed to exist without a technological footprint, as though it had been hand-delivered and then quietly removed. Some staff believed it represented an early consulting experiment by a scientific collaborator who later requested anonymity. Others whispered that the pages might have been left by someone outside the production, entirely someone with an unusual grasp of astrophysics. The mystery deepened when late-stage rewrites incorporated concepts eerily similar to those in the lost packet. The fluid layering of time inside the tesseract, the emotional resonance encoded within gravitational waves, and the collapsing boundaries between memory and dimension all mirrored descriptions from the unverified material. Though the pages have since vanished, their influence lingers in the film's emotional architecture. Whether they were the work of a ghostwriter, a short-term consultant, or an author who never intended to be known, their presence suggests that Interstellar's most haunting metaphysics may have come from an uncredited voice. 7. Minority Report: The Missing Rewrite That Altered Everything. While Minority Report is often remembered for its sleek futurism and moral tension, the project's early development was marked by an anomaly few outside the production ever heard about: a missing rewrite that reportedly reshaped major thematic structures. Several early memos uncovered years later reference a draft that offered a darker, more ethically fraught interpretation of pre-crime operations, a version that emphasized discarded precognitive prototypes, societal decay, and the psychological impact of predictive justice. People who encountered the untraceable rewrite describe it as densely layered, structured around moral contradictions rather than action set pieces. It delved into the internal conflicts of characters forced to uphold a system built on exploiting human precognition. Some scenes mentioned, such as abandoned precog facilities and defunct surveillance corridors, bear similarities to cut concepts known to fans, though they cannot be found in any credited draft. The document's origins remain a mystery. It never appeared in contract filings, version tracking logs, or writer payment records. Handwritten annotations within production binders point to ideas drawn from the missing rewrite, but the draft itself left no trail. Some staff speculated that it may have been produced by an uncredited consultant hired briefly for narrative analysis. Others believed it was an unsolicited, unusually polished submission that circulated informally before being discarded. Despite its disappearance, elements from the phantom rewrite seem woven into the film's underlying tension. The sense of inevitability, the blurred line between justice and authoritarianism, and the quiet horror of systems built on human sacrifice. Its absence leaves an unresolved question: how much of Minority Report's moral architecture came from voices no longer documented, acknowledged, or remembered? 8. Event Horizon: The Draft Removed Before Filming Began. Behind the already infamous production of Event Horizon lies a lesser-known enigma, the rumor of a preliminary screenplay that vanished before any formal documentation could anchor its existence. Often referred to by crew insiders as the preliminary descent draft, the manuscript allegedly contained dense explorations of extra-dimensional influence, crew psychosis, and the ship's increasingly predatory architecture. Several individuals recall reading material that portrayed the ship's reappearance as a catastrophic intersection between physical space and an incomprehensible external domain, far more explicit and unsettling than the version ultimately filmed. Those who engaged with the lost draft describe elaborate sequences of hallucination and spatial distortion, as well as extended character arcs rooted in existential dread rather than shock horror. Some of these ideas circulated informally during creative meetings, though no surviving official draft contains them in full. Notes from early production sessions reference scenes that align closely with witness accounts of the missing manuscript, reinforcing the belief that it influenced the process before disappearing. Attempts to trace the document revealed contradictions. Some crew members insisted it was a commissioned exploratory treatment. Others swore it originated outside the formal development system. There were even rumors that the draft was deliberately withdrawn after executives deemed its content too extreme or too conceptually disorienting for studio approval. By the time the film entered principal photography, no trace of the preliminary descent draft remained, no physical copy, no digital residue, nothing. Yet remnants of its vision appear to linger in the final product, the haunted geometry of the event horizon, the fractured temporal perception, and the sense that the ship itself carries an intelligence beyond human comprehension. Its disappearance adds yet another layer of mystery to a film already built from fragments of the unknown. 9. Donnie Darko, the revision that appeared once and was never seen again. Among the many legends surrounding Donnie Darko, none has stirred more fascination than the elusive X7 revision, a draft mentioned by a few early crew members, yet missing from all official production archives. According to those who recall encountering it, the manuscript presented a version of the story that leaned heavily into metaphysical frameworks, alternate chronologies, and coded exchanges designed to hint at deeper cosmic structures. It contained long, disorienting passages about temporal instability material that does not appear in any publicly acknowledged draft, yet resonates faintly through the film's final form. People who claim to have reviewed X7 describe a distinctly different narrative temperament, sparse dialogue cascading visions of tangent worlds, and detailed annotations explaining the mechanisms behind universe bifurcation. Some scenes reportedly paralleled moments in the director's cut years before that version existed, raising speculation that the lost revision seeded ideas later revisited by Richard Kelly. Handwritten notes in the margins attributed to no known member of the writing team suggested adjustments to emotional beats and symbolic motifs. Efforts to locate the draft after production ended proved fruitless. Database searches yielded no file history, no submission record, and no duplication logs. Yet scattered references within production diaries imply that the revision influenced several conceptual discussions. Some staff insisted the draft was an unauthorized submission mistakenly introduced into the workflow. Others believed it was an abandoned experiment from an early stage of development shelved quickly, but not before it left impressions on the creative process. 10. 2001 Space Odyssey, the outline that preceded every known draft. Although 2001 A Space Odyssey is officially framed as a collaboration between Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick, an enduring mystery challenges that tidy narrative, a conceptual outline referenced in early production correspondence that neither man ever claimed. The document, described by several individuals who handled early development material, purportedly detailed a vision of cosmic evolution, extraterrestrial intervention, and transcendence well beyond what public records show Clarke and Kubrick had formulated at the time. Witnesses described the outline as unusually comprehensive, mapping the thematic ascent from primitive humanity to post-human transformation with a clarity that seemed premature for the project stage. Certain beats from the film's conclusion, including the Stargate sequence and the transformation of consciousness, were reportedly articulated in this outline long before such ideas appeared in any verified drafts. When researchers attempted to locate the document, they found only gaps missing catalog numbers, ambiguous references, and metadata suggesting that something had been removed from the archive. Clarke's journals briefly mention an unplaced outline, while Kubrick deflected inquiries entirely. Nothing resembling the outline exists in studio holdings today. Some scholars argue the document may have been an early exploratory treatment produced by an uncredited staffer. Others contend it was Clarke's experimental attempt to unify thematic concepts later disavowed because it diverged too sharply from the evolving script. Yet the idea that resonates most persistently is the possibility that the outline served as a quiet template shaping the film's philosophical architecture while its origin faded from memory. If such a document existed, it complicates the authorship of 2001, suggesting that its foundational vision may have emerged from a source deliberately or accidentally obscured. Its absence leaves a blank space precisely where the film's most transcendent ideas should have a traceable beginning. 11. Dark City, the revision that nobody acknowledged writing. Although Dark City is celebrated for its atmospheric labyrinths and shifting identities, an even stranger story lingers behind the scenes, the tale of a revision draft that seemed to appear without a writer. Production staff from the mid-development phase reportedly encountered a version containing restructured scenes, altered thematic framing, and expanded descriptions of the city's unnatural architecture. Yet when asked, neither the credited writers nor the studio executives recognized the manuscript as theirs. Those who reviewed it recall a voice markedly different from Alex Proyas's known collaborators, colder, more conceptual, and more focused on cognitive manipulation. The revision emphasized memory reconstruction, spatial instability, and the eerie mechanics of a city remade each night. Elements of these descriptions resurfaced later during filming, though no surviving draft contains them in the same configuration. The strangest clues were handwritten notes, scrawled in the margins, cryptic instructions, seemingly directing shifts in pacing and tone. The handwriting belonged to no member of the writing or directing team. When archivists tried to trace the draft, they discovered that it had never been formally logged. No version number, no date stamp, no archival ID. It simply existed within the workflow, then vanished. Some propose that the mysterious revision belonged to a consultant hired briefly and then removed from credits. Others argue it came from an earlier discarded iteration of the project, mistakenly reintroduced at a later stage. A persistent minority claims the draft was intentionally purged because it conflicted with the direction the studio wanted. Regardless of its origin, the revision's influence remains detectable. Certain visual motifs, narrative choices, and unsettling tonal shifts in Dark City correspond more closely to descriptions of the missing draft than to any sanctioned script. It suggests a hidden contributor, someone whose imprint endures even though their name does not. 12. The Matrix, the script that entered the system without a name. Long before The Matrix established its groundbreaking mythology, an unusual script quietly circulated inside Warner Bros. A document that did not correspond to any verified Wachowski draft. Studio file references later uncovered by archivists mention an unregistered screenplay that appeared months before the first authorized version was logged. No cover page accompanied it, no submission note, and no author attribution. Yet the material reportedly contained early forms of ideas that would later define the film's identity. Individuals who recall handling the mysterious script describe an elaborate depiction of simulated consciousness-controlled environments and the gradual awakening of a protagonist trapped inside an engineered reality. These concepts surfaced in raw conceptual forms, stranger and more philosophical than the polished narrative eventually released. Several action sequences referenced in these accounts resemble iconic scenes from the film, including the rooftop pursuit and the uncanny visual expression of system anomalies, despite not matching any archive draft attributed to the Wachowskis. When questioned in later years, the filmmakers denied ever encountering such a manuscript, and the studio maintained no awareness of its origins. Nonetheless, testimonies from assistants and dev staff consistently identify details that aligned with the anonymous document rather than with known versions. The script's disappearance only deepened the enigma. It left no trace in digital storage systems, no scan, and no version lineage. It existed briefly, then dissipated like a glitch. Speculation continues about its author. Some believe it was a speculative piece that inadvertently entered internal circulation. Others suspect it originated from a contracted writer whose contribution was quietly excised. A more disquieting theory holds that the script was deliberately removed after influencing early conceptual discussions. Whatever its origin, the Phantom screenplay casts a subtle shadow over the formation of the Matrix, hinting that unseen hands may have helped shape one of sci-fi's most defining visions. 13. The Terminator, the precursor manuscript that no one claimed. Before The Terminator emerged as a seminal force in sci-fi cinema, whispers circulated about a manuscript that predated James Cameron's officially recognized treatment. This early document, referenced in obscure production notes and recalled by a handful of staff, supposedly outlined a skeletal form of the story, a relentless machine assassin, a fractured timeline, and a future shaped by humanity's own creations. Yet the manuscript bore no signature, no cover page, and no submission record. It simply appeared, circulated briefly, and faded without attribution. Those who reportedly handled the manuscript describe a narrative more abstract and dreamlike than the film that followed. Time travel was framed as a paradoxical recursion rather than a tactical mechanism, and the antagonist's motivations were described in philosophical terms rather than programmed directives. Elements of fear, inevitability, and technological destiny echoed throughout the unclaimed pages, paralleling themes Cameron would later solidify, but expressed here in a distinctly different voice. When legal controversies later emerged surrounding similarities to existing science fiction works, some investigators searched for the precursor manuscript, hoping to clarify its origins. They found nothing. Studio logs did not acknowledge its existence. Writers associated with the project insisted they had never seen it. Payment records listed no contributor who fit the description. The document seemed to have no recognized creator. Yet certain narrative beats in the finished film, particularly the cyclical nature of fate and the looming presence of unseen future architects, align more closely with accounts of the missing manuscript than with the drafts that survive. If the precursor manuscript was real, then it played a silent, invisible role in shaping a franchise that continues to influence modern sci-fi. Its missing author, whoever they were, might have contributed one of the genre's foundational visions before slipping completely out of view. 14. Alien, the unaccounted for origins draft. In the collective mythology surrounding Alien, one of the most persistent rumors involves an obscure early draft often referred to as the unaccounted for version. Before Dan O'Bannon's script took shape, before the xenomorph became a genre-defining nightmare, this mysterious manuscript reportedly circulated through the production offices without explanation. Archivists, reviewing scattered references, discovered early memos that mentioned a script containing structural beats and creature concepts absent from any recognized draft. Yet no one could identify the document's origin. Crew members who recall glimpsing the pages describe a narrative steeped in ritual imagery, evolutionary symbolism, and an unsettlingly clinical depiction of extraterrestrial biology. Several sequences mentioned in these accounts echo elements of the final film, though they do not appear in any officially attributed revision. The draft's tone, colder, more methodical, and strangely prophetic, suggested a writer with insight into the film's eventual direction, even before its creative foundation was fully established. Attempts to locate the script in studio archives yielded no results. It carried no tracking number, no revision stamp, and no known writer's imprint. Some staff believed it was an early discarded experiment from a consultant or an uncredited collaborator. Others thought it might have been an unsolicited script incorrectly routed into the internal workflow. Yet the most compelling aspect is how traces of the phantom draft seem to have survived in the final cut conceptual details about alien reproduction, environmental architecture, and the nature of isolation appear more aligned with descriptions of the missing version than with O'Bannon's surviving materials. Whether the draft was a misplaced contribution, a forgotten collaboration, or an intentional anomaly, its absence leaves a void in Alien's creative history, a reminder that the film may have been molded in part by a writer who vanished before the project took form. 15. Blade Runner, the draft that came from nowhere. Long before Blade Runner crystallized into its iconic form, the project was already surrounded by a peculiar story and early screenplay that seemed to materialize without verifiable authorship. Production researchers who later combed through development files noted references to a proto-manuscript that predated every credited draft. Yet no one, neither Hampton Fancher nor studio staff, ever acknowledged writing or receiving it directly. This enigmatic version reportedly contained a darker, more philosophical tone, delving deeply into questions of artificial consciousness and fractured memory long before Ridley Scott finalized the film's dystopian aesthetic. Individuals who handled photocopied fragments describe scenes and world-building details that feel eerily predictive of the finished movie. Rooftop confrontations, existential monologues, and environmental decay appeared in the anonymous pages, with a clarity suggesting an author intimately familiar with the film's eventual direction. What makes the mystery even stranger is that several passages aligned more closely with sequences in the final cut than with any draft officially archived. It was as though the unknown writer had anticipated elements Scott would later invent. Efforts to trace the manuscript failed almost immediately. Studio logs contained no receipt, no submission record, and no contractual trail. The only surviving copy, a faded duplicate stored in a mislabeled folder, vanished during a facility reorganization in the late 1980 C. Whether the disappearance was accidental or intentional remains unresolved. Some speculate the draft was an unsolicited submission that slipped through procedural cracks. Others argue it might have been produced by a collaborator who stepped away before formal credit discussions. But the most intriguing theory holds that the manuscript served as a quiet blueprint shaping the film, while the identity of its creator dissolved into obscurity. If the anonymous draft truly influenced Blade Runner, then one of sci-fi's defining works may rest partly on the vision of a writer whose name was never meant to surface. Prometheus, the unrecorded rewrite that questioned humanity's purpose. Among the many stories surrounding Prometheus and its development, one of the most persistent involves a rewrite known informally as the Purpose Draft. This manuscript appeared late in pre-production and was said to contain radical thematic shifts positioning humanity not as explorers of their origins, but as participants in a long-forgotten cosmic conflict. The rewrite circulated briefly among story analysts before vanishing without a trace from the studio archives. Those who read the Purpose Draft describe a narrative far more philosophical than the film that reached audiences. It proposed that the engineers had once attempted to elevate humanity into a second-tier species designed for service, only to abandon the project after catastrophic failures. The script also introduced an expanded subplot involving the engineer's internal schism, suggesting that the black goo was not a weapon, but the residue of a civil war. None of these elements appear in any authenticated drafts, yet their conceptual echoes can be faintly detected in early interviews from the production team. Searches for the rewrite yielded nothing. No payment trails, no revision logs, and no digital metadata linked to its creation. Some insiders speculated that the purpose draft may have been produced by an uncredited consultant whose ideas were deemed too disruptive. Others believe it was removed intentionally to avoid contradicting the established alien lore. Even without surviving copies, the purpose draft continues to stir debate among fans and researchers. If its contents were truly as transformative as rumored, it may represent the boldest direction Prometheus never took, an alternate vision lost just before filming began. When we trace the faint trails left by these vanished drafts, the boundaries of authorship begin to dissolve. Each film, celebrated for its originality, may carry echoes of voices that slipped through the industry, unnoticed writers who appeared in the margins for a moment before being erased from the record. Perhaps these unseen contributors were early collaborators. Perhaps they were never meant to be identified. What remains is the unsettling realization that the stories shaping our understanding of science fiction may have origins far more obscure than their official histories suggest. And somewhere beyond cataloged archives, more forgotten, scripts may still be waiting to resurface.